Will come to order. As I came around the hall, I thought maybe we were giving away Springsteen tickets or something. I wasn't sure what was going on here, but we have our own star with Secretary Duncan. Secretary, thank you for joining us today to discuss President Obama's agenda in transforming education in America. We think that we're at a unique moment in the history of this country, with all of the challenges that America is facing. I think that the President made a wise choice when he said that he wanted, after the stimulus, to rebuild the American economy through a new energy policy, education policy, and health care policy. This committee is involved in 2 out of 3 of those. I was encouraged this morning when I heard the chairman of the board of General Electric saying that if he was going to make one big bet for the future of innovation and technology in this country and jobs here at home, it would be in energy. And he also made it very clear that if you're going to have that innovation and its contributions to the technological changes, we needed a well-educated workforce. We could no longer suffer the achievement gaps that we have in this country. We've worked hard to try to close them, but much more needs to be done. We can no longer afford to have only 70% of our graduates, high school graduates, graduate, obviously, the graduates. I'll get to the English language down here in a moment. That these are nagging problems, and that clearly we've got to do all that we can, and Mr. McKean has been a champion of this, to make college more affordable and to deal with the cost of college. It's very difficult to talk about at a time of recession when state resources are crashing all over the country, but we've got to have more support from the states for our public institutions. I think both you and President Obama have clearly articulated that you see education as a basic civil rights, and this is the civil rights issue of our generation. And I think that members will have many questions of you, but I think clearly your budget reflects these priorities by improving, providing the resources to improve the early learning opportunities for our youngest students so that they're school ready, and to provide better coordination among those opportunities within the states. The articulation that you've given to the need for world-class standards, common standards in this country to take us to a new place, both in curriculum, in assessments, is very, very important. And the idea that every child would have access to an effective, qualified teachers, and that those teachers should enjoy and deserve a modern professional workplace where their talents, their time, their skills will be, and their success will be rewarded. And I think that these are very, very important ideas for this administration and for our country as we struggle to come out of this economic downturn following the financial scandals. But we will, and we've got to emerge stronger in what will even be a more competitive and globalized economy and world. I think with the commitment that you made for the $100 billion as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act sent a huge signal to the educators of this country, to families in this country, that you were again placing a bet on the ability of our education system to achieve the kind of success that parents want, that students want, that teachers want, and certainly we want as a society and as an economy. I think you've captured the imagination and maybe the anticipation of so many people in this country and in the Congress with your unprecedented fund for the race to the top. I hope that you will set the bar very high for those who get to participate. I think you have something very valuable in terms of the incentives that you can provide, the leadership that you can provide to truly take us to a different place with respect to our expectations and the realization of what can be done in the American education system, led by states who are willing to take their education systems to the future and stop standing pat on the status quo. So it's a great honor for me, but it's also with a great deal of excitement to welcome you to our committee, and to the members who will play an important role on both sides of the aisle. This is one of the more bipartisan committees in the House. We start out each and every time trying to be there. We don't always agree. We don't always end up on that bipartisan, but we've tried with Mr. McKee and myself when he was chair, when I'm chair, to try to work it out and see how long we could go down that road. And we will continue to address the initiatives of this administration in that same fashion. Thank you for being here. And now I'd like to recognize the senior Republican on our committee, Congressman McKee, my colleague from California.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. And good morning. Good morning to you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for appearing before this committee. I hope your testimony will be the start of a good, meaningful conversation today about the future of education in America. I also hope this conversation can lead to common ground, one where both Democrats and Republicans can work together to improve our nation's schools. But a good conversation usually involves 2 points of view. That's why I would like to take a moment to briefly outline the Republican education agenda. By putting everything on the table this way, perhaps we can reach that common ground together and sooner. So here's where Republicans stand. Our basic philosophy is this: education decisions should be left to those who make them best: parents, local school districts, and the states. The federal government should play a limited but helpful role in making those decisions. To that end, we stand for constant improvement and innovation in education. I know we've had several conversations already, and I know that's right where you are. We also believe in the right of parents to choose the school or other educational options that best fits the needs of their children. And we demand results from our reforms so the taxpayer dollars are not wasted. Mr. Secretary, judging by what I've heard from you and President Obama in recent months, there are some areas where we can work together. Charter schools are a good example. Both you and the President have expressed support for them as a tool to improve student achievement. We Republicans also support good charter schools. We hope to hear ideas from you today about how we can ensure that states are not limiting this option by placing arbitrary caps on how many charter schools can operate. I also believe we can work together on expanding pay-for-performance systems. We believe that teachers and principals should be rewarded for their success in improving academic achievement. But there are other areas where we're not in agreement at this time, areas where the administration has acted to protect the status quo at the expense of low-income students. The DC Opportunity Scholarship Program is a good example. This groundbreaking program has helped thousands of low-income students here in Washington attend the school of their choice, including Sidwell Friends, where the President's children attend. However, instead of helping to save the program, the President recently signed a law that effectively phased it out. Your agency, Mr. Secretary, revoked scholarships that had been awarded to new students for the upcoming school year. I know you want to improve public schools for all children, so do I. But until that happens, we shouldn't take away this critical lifeline. More than 7,000 DC residents have signed a petition imploring us to keep the program alive. Student loans are another area where we respectfully disagree with President Obama's agenda. Members on both sides of the aisle are troubled by the President's proposal to end the Federal Family Education, or FEL, program. So there are 1,646 financial aid officials and students who have signed another petition urging Congress to keep FEL and oppose the administration's proposal. This program has been around for more than 4 decades. It's made the dream of a college education and the quality of life that often comes with that degree possible for millions. One of the reasons for this success is because the program can be tailored best to fit students' needs, thanks to the private lenders, not-for-profits, and state agencies that have all partnered with the federal government, colleges, and universities to serve students. If we follow the President's plan and use only a direct loan program, this would end the significant public-private partnership and replace it with the federal government and its contractors. There would be a one-size-fits-all Washington program for the more than 6,500 colleges and universities in America, whose diversity is the cornerstone of higher education in this country. Ending this public-private partnership also will cost more than 30,000 jobs right off the bat and could affect thousands more. That said, we are not against reforming our nation's complex financial aid system. Some reforms can be made, but we think it's best to have a thoughtful and deliberate conversation with all the parties. Just this week, I heard from several small colleges that are very opposed to being forced to convert to direct loans. These colleges are concerned that their voices are not being heard in the rush to promote the direct loan program. They have real concerns, and we should listen to the impact such a conversion will have on their students and institutions. That way we can make some good reforms while keeping what works in the program for all our colleges and the students they serve. With that, I look forward to your remarks and continuing this conversation. Here are the petitions I mentioned. We'll be glad to get them over to your office. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'd like to officially introduce Arne Duncan, who was nominated to be Secretary of Education by President Obama and was confirmed by the Senate on January 20th, 2009. Prior to his appointment as Secretary of Education, Mr. Duncan served as Chief Executive Officer of the Chicago Public Schools, a position which he was appointed by Mayor Richard Daley from June 2001 to December 2008. In his position, he became the longest-serving big city education superintendent in the country. In his role as CEO, Mr. Duncan was able to raise the educational standards and performance, to improve teacher and principal quality, and increase learning options. He helped unite education reformers and bring together education stakeholders from across the spectrum to raise the bar in Chicago's public schools. He's a dynamic leader who has an appreciation for real reform, ending the status quo. He's a true disruptor. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the committee. Under the rules of the committee, we generally allow witnesses 5 minutes. You're the only witness. You're the Secretary of Education, and we want you to proceed in the manner in which you're most comfortable to get across to the committee the points you want to make. And then we'll have questions from the members of the committee as long as the time lasts.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Chairman Miller, for your extraordinary leadership. To Representative McEwen, thank you so much for your hard work. And I feel very, very lucky to have leadership on both sides of the aisle who is passionate, who is absolutely committed to helping us improve. And I look forward to working with all of you to help take education in our country to an entirely different level. And Chairman Miller, just—
I think if we can get you to pull the microphone, I see some heads nodding in the back of the room a little bit.
A little closer. And Chairman Miller, just on a personal level, this transition to Washington, you've been just an absolute champion, someone I've learned a tremendous amount from. And I want to thank you for your leadership, your thoughtfulness, and your heart and passion for kids around the country. I want to begin by just expressing my grave concern for the very disturbing and troubling information that came out of your hearing yesterday on restraints and seclusion. And where you see children being hurt, children's safety has to be our #1 concern before we begin to think about educating them and doing other things. And so this is one where I'm going to ask state school chiefs from around the country to report to me what their plans are to make sure that student safety is taken care of. And as we go into the summer and prepare for next school year, I want to make sure as we go into next school year that every state has a real clear plan as to how to do this in a way that makes sense and doesn't jeopardize, doesn't endanger children. As you know, I come from Chicago, and in Illinois, and I think your testimony yesterday, Illinois has what I think is a very effective plan that prohibits the use of seclusion and restraint for punishment. It places time limits on this and requires monitoring and communication. It requires specific documentation of each incident. There's significant training. And because of all that, you've seen a dramatic reduction in the number of these incidents. There's also on our website information on positive behavioral interventions and supports, www.pbis.org, that I think is an invaluable resource. And so I'm going to be working with state school chiefs as we go into next school year to make sure that across the country we are thoughtful and we are not doing anything that endangers children or hurts or puts them in any kind of jeopardy. So we work very hard on that and appreciate.
Well, thank you for that. I know Mr. McKeon and I discussed this yesterday, and we would love to see the leadership come from the states. And if you could help coordinate that, that would really be helpful.
So we'll do whatever we can there. That's a very, very important issue. And again, I was deeply disturbed by some of the testimony coming out of yesterday's hearing. It's my pleasure to share with you President Obama's plan for American education. It is a comprehensive plan that meets the educational needs of our youngest citizens from cradle to career. If we are going to be successful in rebuilding our economy, our early childhood programs need to prepare our youngest children for kindergarten so they are ready to start reading and learning. Our K-12 schools need to make sure our students have all of the academic knowledge and skills they need to enter college or the workforce. And our higher education system needs to offer whatever advanced learning students need to be successful in a career, whether they will become a plumber, a teacher, or a business executive. As federal policymakers, we need to improve preparation for college and expand college access and completion by increasing financial aid so that students of all income levels can pay for college without taking on a mountain of debt. I'm proud to work for a president who has created a comprehensive agenda that addresses the needs at every level of our educational system, from expanding access to high-quality early childhood programs, to improving the rigor of the academic programs in our K-12 schools, to making college more affordable and accessible. We have tried to get off to a fast start here. Through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, we have laid the groundwork for reform on the K-12 level and made an early down payment on expanding access to early childhood education and increasing student aid for college students. The law made available almost $100 billion for education. I want to thank all of you for your generosity and support. That money will help prevent hundreds of thousands of layoffs, fill holes in state and local budgets, and provide financial aid to college students. The money is needed to help our economy in the short term, but very important reform efforts driven by these funds will be the key to our long-term economic success. Under the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, states will receive $48.6 billion to supplement their own budgets during these difficult economic times. The Recovery Act says that states must spend most of that funding on education. $39.8 billion of that should go to schools. And I want to assure everyone here that I'll be scrutinizing how states spend their stabilization money to make sure they are focused on education. I've heard that some states are thinking about using their stabilization money to maintain the rainy day fund, and that others may rely on their stabilization grants to pay for tax cuts instead of investing in reforms. Let me be clear. I will do everything in my power to reject any schemes that would subvert the intended purpose of the Recovery Act, which is to help schools through the economic downturn and push reform, thereby ensuring our economic prosperity in the future. When reviewing applications for the Race to the Top fund, we plan to consider whether a state use their stabilization money to aggressively push reforms. In addition to helping states solve their budget problems, the Stabilization Fund lays out a path to reform. To receive their money, states must make 4 commitments that are absolutely essential to reforming our K-12 schools. First, they will improve the effectiveness of teachers and will work to make sure that the best teachers are in the schools that need them the most. Secondly, they promise to improve the quality of their academic standards so that they lead students down a path that prepares them for college and the workforce and global competitiveness. These standards need to be aligned with strong assessments. In addition, states must work to ensure that these assessments accurately measure the achievement of English language learners and students with disabilities. Third, states must commit to fixing their lowest performing schools. And finally, states must build data systems that can track student performance from one year to the next, from one school to another, so that those students and their parents will know when they are making progress and when they need extra attention. This information also must be put in the hands of educators so they can use it on a real-time basis to improve instruction. Right now, according to the Data Quality Campaign, DQC, Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, Florida, Louisiana, and Utah are the only states that are reported to have comprehensive data systems meeting the basic elements of a good system. With $250 million in the stimulus and another $65 million in our annual budget for fiscal year 09 and again in fiscal year 010, we expect these numbers to continue to grow, which is absolutely vital to reform. In addition to the stabilization money, the Recovery Act, as you talked about, gave us $5 billion to spur innovation in states and in districts. Through the Race to the Top fund, we will be awarding $4.35 billion in competitive grants to states built around the 4 pillars of reform outlined in the Stabilization Fund. Through the What Works and Innovation Fund, we will also be awarding $650 million in competitive grants to districts and nonprofit organizations to scale up successful programs and evaluate promising practices. And I promise you, Mr. Chairman, we will have a very high bar. We want to invest in what works, take that to scale. The goal here is not to perpetuate the status quo. It's really to take education to an entirely different level, to both raise the bar and to close the achievement gap. Our fiscal year 2010 budget will expand our commitment to reforms in several important ways, addressing the needs from early childhood through K-12 education. Under the Title I program, we will provide $1.5 billion for the School Improvement Program. This money is vital for helping states and districts address problems in schools that are in the most trouble. We already have $3 billion for this program from the Recovery Act and another $545 million from fiscal year 2009. By adding $1.5 billion in fiscal year 2010, we have more than $5 billion to address the problems of our lowest performing schools. I'd like to set a goal to turn around over time 1,000 low performing schools each year. I do not want to invest in the status quo. For children, families, and communities that have been poorly served for too long, we must act with a sense of urgency. We cannot wait because they cannot wait. When we think about only 2,000 schools in this country producing 50% of our nation's dropouts and 75% of our minority children dropouts, we have a real challenge there. We have a real opportunity with resources on the table and with courage and political will to challenge that, to work with those dropout factories, to work with their feeder middle schools and elementary schools, to fundamentally stop those dropout factories, those dropout pipelines, and do something dramatically better for those children and communities that I would argue in many places have been underserved, not for a couple years, but for decades. And everyone in this room knows that when children drop out today, they are basically condemned to poverty and to social failure. There are no good jobs out there for high school dropout, and we have to act now to make sure we do something better for those children, those communities. I want states and districts to take bold action that will lead directly to the improvement in student learning. I want local leaders to find those change agents who can fix these schools. I want them to provide incentives for the best teachers and the best principals to take on the challenge of teaching in these schools. And where appropriate, I want them to create partnerships with charter school operators with a track record for success. I want superintendents to be aggressive in taking the difficult step of shutting down a failing school and replacing it with one they know will work. We've proposed a $52 million increase in funding to develop and expand successful charter schools. Many of you have heard me say that I believe education is the civil rights issue of our time. I absolutely believe every child is entitled to a high-quality education, and I will work closely with the Office of Civil Rights to make sure that we properly review compliance in all programs and policy making. The fiscal year 2010 budget starts new programs and expands existing ones to address our priorities in early childhood education and literacy. We will create the $300 million Early Learning Challenge Fund that will award grants to help states set up the support and services necessary to build quality early childhood education. We will provide $500 million in grants through Title I to help districts use their Title I money to establish and expand preschool programs. We will expand the Striving Readers program from a small $35 million program focused on middle school and high schools to a $370 million program that addresses the reading needs of children in elementary schools as well. The program will take a comprehensive approach to reading instruction, ensuring that students develop the basic skills as well as the reading comprehension that is so vital to their success in high school and beyond. We will also continue our focus on promoting the teaching profession. Great teachers and great teaching matters tremendously. With $517 million in our fiscal year 2010 budget, we will continue and expand our support for local efforts under the Teacher Incentive Fund to develop comprehensive strategies for recruiting, preparing, rewarding, and retaining great teachers. We also request $10 million to start to plan new Promised Neighborhoods modeled on the highly successful Harlem Children's Zone. We are committed to acting on evidence. And we request $72 million more for the Institute for Education Sciences so we can identify what works based on rigorous research, invest more in what works, and stop spending money on ineffective programs. Our agenda from early childhood through 12th grade is focused on helping states do the right thing. And that's appropriate because states are responsible for establishing systems of education through the 12th grade. It is our role to make it a national priority to reform schools and to help states and districts do just that. For more than 40 years, the federal government has played a leading role in helping students pay for college. Continuing this vital role, the total amount of aid for students has increased by $32 billion since President Obama has taken office. By subsidizing loans and by providing work-study programs, and most importantly, giving Pell Grants to low-income students, the federal government is fulfilling the dreams of students who want to be able to go to college but might not have the resources to pay for it. President Obama has set an ambitious goal that by 2020, the United States once again will have the highest proportion of college graduates in the world. He fully understands that we have to educate our way to a better economy. That's an achievable goal, but to hit it, we have to make college affordable. The Recovery Act made an important down payment on our plans to expand student aid. The ERA Act provided $17.1 billion so we could raise the maximum Pell Award from $4,731 to $5,350. We also added $200 million to the work-study program, providing colleges and universities with additional money to provide jobs to students to help with their college and their living expenses. In our fiscal year 2010 budget, we want to make 3 important and permanent changes to ensure students have access to student aid and loans. The first thing it will do is to move the Pell Grant program from a discretionary program into a mandatory appropriated entitlement. This approach will provide more certainty to students and families applying for student aid about the aid that's available to them. In addition, the Pell amounts will grow annually at a rate higher than inflation so that it keeps up with rising college costs. The second thing this budget does is address the problems with the FEL program. I think we all agree that the FEL structure is broken and on life support now, and the federal student loan programs are in need of a dependable, cost-effective way of providing college-bound students and their families with the resources they need to meet the growing cost of post-secondary education. The direct lending program is the best way to do that. Through it, we will be able to leverage the government's lower cost of funds to finance and originate student loans and provide private sector expertise to service those loans. The President's proposal provides a comprehensive and reliable solution for today's students while saving taxpayers over $4 billion a year. It will be more stable and efficient, reducing risk for students and lowering costs for taxpayers. The third thing we are doing is boosting the Perkins Loan Program from $1 billion to $6 billion per year. The number of students served will rise from 500,000 to 2.7 million, and the number of schools that can participate in the program will increase from 1,800 to 4,400, which also means that we can serve more students. Also, to keep college affordable for our Perkins proposal allocates funds to schools based on their role in keeping tuitions down and providing grant aid to needy students. This further builds upon Congress's recent mandate to create watch lists of colleges with high or excessive increases in tuition. In closing, I'd like to remind you of one thing the President said when he addressed Congress in February. He said, in a global economy where the most valuable skill you can sell is your knowledge, a good education is no longer just a pathway to opportunity, it is a prerequisite. Thank you so much for your support so far in ensuring that our children and our young adults have the education they need to ensure they enter the workforce with the knowledge and skills they need to be successful and to help rebuild our economy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for that review of your priorities and of the budget. And thank you for again reiterating your goals and standards for the fund for the race to the top. The action of the Congress to give a single secretary $5 billion in discretionary money is an amazing act for the Congress, but I think it's also a vote of confidence in you. I think that many of the members of this committee supported that effort because they were here when you and Michelle Rhee and Joel Klein and Beverly Hall from Atlanta came and testified about the results that many of you had achieved, the possibilities that you saw for the improved outcomes, the achievement of our students in the various efforts that all of you had made within large, complicated districts, but to provide various alternatives for students and for teachers. I would again just say that you know, when you put $5 billion on the table in Washington, D.C., there's no shortage of people who are all of a sudden have a renewed interest in that agenda, whatever it is. And I would just hope that you would be selective. I think that we've got to have a clear understanding, and it's very clear that there are governors and large districts that do want to go to the future. They do want to change the manner in which education has been delivered. They do want a different set of outcomes, and many of them have demonstrated that, in fact, they can do that. So I would just say that I think it would be better to have fewer entities doing more, because, in fact, they can be the pathway and the beacon to other districts who still think this is too difficult to do or too politically complicated to do. But the fact is the students of this country are entitled to that. So I'm not sure that everybody should be able to participate just because there's so much money. I think they should be able to participate because they've demonstrated that they're prepared to make the difficult, tough choices that are starting to show results all over this country, in charter schools, in regular public schools, in large districts and small districts, and rural areas, with the exact population that we're so terribly concerned about in terms of the achievement gap and whether or not they will have a full opportunity to participate in American society. Those results that you achieved in a number of settings in Chicago cannot be ignored any longer. They are possible. They are here for those who want to seek them out. So I think having the willingness and the evidence of the capacity for those who participate in the Race to the Top fund, that they've got to be able to demonstrate that before they're allowed. That's my thinking on that. I also want to commend you for the urgency that you're putting behind the effort to change our high schools, specifically what have now unfortunately become, but I guess properly described as dropout factories. We now know those schools that provide these dramatic numbers for these unfortunate students. We now know many of the middle schools that contribute to that population, and the ability and the research that's available to tell us that we can change many of those outcomes by being engaged with those students earlier on. We cannot make the decisions about fighting dropouts in 10th grade. There's just no evidence that works. That effort around the high school initiatives that have been proposed has been bipartisan in this committee. I think we're ready to move to make the changes that are necessary so that we can effectively change the outcomes in these students and the performance of these schools. So we look forward to working with you on that. I'm also very encouraged by the budget submission on behalf of the Teacher Incentive Fund. This was started by the past administration. I'm not quite sure how they got it started, but they got it started. It's not without controversy, but I think it's yielding results for willing school districts with their teachers, with their unions, with other organizations, community organizations, nonprofit, who really want to change the workplace, to change the opportunities for teachers, and to change the outcomes. It was threatened to be zeroed out quite often. Fortunately, it wasn't, and I think that the increase that you're providing there will serve teachers and school districts and students in a very positive way. Others will have more to say on this, but again, I'm also encouraged by the increase in support for charter schools. I think that's very important. Again, much of the evidence, many of the outcomes that we see that are so improving are coming from that community, and they should be encouraged, and we should do what we can, the best we can, to not have states throw up artificial barriers to their creation or to their expansion, to their success, as long as they're able to provide the results that we expect from them. So thank you very, very much for your testimony. I'm not going to ask you questions. I'm going to try to move this along, and I'm going to recognize Mr. McKeon for questions. But thank you for the submissions, and thank you for the priorities you chose in the President's budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions. Mr. Secretary, you said you'd like to set a goal to turn around 1,000 low-performing schools a year for each of the next 5 years, and I commend you for that. I understand you had some success with this in Chicago. How did you work with the teachers' unions in this effort? How can a district that wants to close low-performing schools and reopen them with a new instructional team do that in light of collective bargaining agreements and other regulations?
Let me start with sort of a broader statement of how I view schools. And I see schools generally in 3 different buckets. You have a set of very high-performing schools, district schools, neighborhood schools, magnet schools, charter schools, where we have great results, where we have long waiting lists. And I think all of us need to be in the business of replicating those schools, creating more of those kinds of options. You have a set of schools in the middle that are maybe not performing where you'd like them to be, that are improving each year. And we need to continue to invest in those and continue to help them grow and provide more resources and more professional development and help them on their path towards excellence. However, as a country, and I think we have about 95,000 schools in the country, let's round it off to 100,000. If we just took the bottom 1%, and I don't think we could do this in the first year, we have to work up to this, but if we took the bottom 1% of those schools each year and fundamentally changed them, fundamentally challenged the status quo, and again, in the vast majority of these cases, what most troubles me is these schools have not been at the bottom for a year or 2 years. It's often been for 10, 20, 30 years, literally decades. And when we as educators aren't helping students be successful, we become part of the problem. So what you do, and this is tough work, this is hard, this is controversial, this is the ultimate in challenging the status quo. But when you have schools where the vast majority of students are dropping out, and even districts, and just to take a moment, the previous week I was in Detroit. Detroit, for the city, has approximately a 75% dropout rate. It is an absolutely staggering number. 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, however you want to define it, of every 3rd grader, 5th grader, 9th grader will never graduate from those schools.
Mr. Secretary, my time is limited.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So how did you work with unions, and how do you deal with the collective bargaining agreements and regulations to accomplish this?
It was tough work with the unions. The unions weren't always supportive of this, but this is not just about coming back with charter schools. And we came back with better staff. Actually, in every single case, that was union staff. Those are union teachers. And so it's not about what the talent pool is. It's about saying, let's stop investing. More money is not always the answer. Investing in something that's broken, sometimes you have to start fresh. And you have to come in there. And there are great, great teachers and principals who want a chance to make a difference, who want to go to the toughest of communities. They just have to feel they have to have a chance to be successful. So what do you need? You need a great principal. You need a team of teachers. If you send 2 teachers into a dysfunctional situation, they'll get overwhelmed. You send a whole team of folks in there together and a chance to build a culture from scratch. You have extraordinarily committed, dynamic teachers and principals who want to take on this work. So the talent pool, I'm absolutely convinced, is there. We have to create those kinds of opportunities.
I hope we're able to help you to accomplish that. Mr. Secretary, your budget creates a new program targeted toward helping students in elementary schools learn to read. I heard that your staff said that the rationale for creating a new reading program was that there was no longer a consensus on how to teach children to read. That's a surprise to me. I would think it's a surprise to the folks at the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development and on the National Reading Panel. Do you believe that teaching students the essential tenets of reading as laid out in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and by the National Reading Panel are no longer valid?
No, I think we need a balanced, comprehensive approach, and this funding and this commitment is to absolutely make sure that every child gets off to a great start.
We talked a little bit about this yesterday. After teaching reading for as many years as we've been teaching, we should have a knowledge of how to do it. President Obama has called charter schools one of the places where innovation occurs, and he's called on the states to lift caps on the number of charter schools. Since it's clear that the President sees charter schools playing an important role in turning around poor-performing schools, how do you plan on convincing states to lift caps on these schools?
Well, there are a number of different opportunities we have, both in terms of carrots and sticks. But one of the things that Chairman Miller talked about is we haven't issued it yet. The RFP doesn't exist, but as we created a request for proposals around the Race to Top funds, one of the questions we're going to be asking, we're going to ask a series of questions around charter schools, and one of the questions we're going to ask is does your state have charter caps?
And my final question, your budget proposes major changes to the Perkins Loan Program, transforming it into a tool to encourage colleges to control costs. It reminds me of a proposal I offered several years ago to use campus-based aid programs, including Perkins, to achieve that same goal of holding down costs. Unfortunately, my plan was rejected by the higher education community. I hope you have better luck than I did. And to that end, I have two specific questions. First, will all sectors, including proprietary, be eligible for this program? And second, can you share some specifics about how this will work, how you think it will bring costs down, and what other plans you may have to get colleges to control their costs?
Yeah, we have to, proprietary, I think will be eligible. Let me check that. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to push folks in the right direction. I think we have an opportunity to do that. I will add, I think things have really changed now. Students and parents have more options than they have ever had, and where you see costs escalating, exponentially way higher than rate of inflation, parents and students are going to vote with their feet. And I think there's going to be a real market correction here. And you're seeing other universities go the opposite way, go to 3-year programs rather than 4, go to no frills, low cost options. And so we're going to put whatever pressure we can on it, but our parents and our students are very smart. They have thousands of options, and where costs are just escalating, you're going to see that, particularly in this economic climate, I'm convinced you're going to see those universities lose market share. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that those kinds of things happen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Duncan, it's good to have you before our committee. As I mentioned to you yesterday, I've served now with 9 Secretaries of Education. I was co-sponsor of the bill that established the department, and I have enormous confidence in you. And you have an enormous responsibility. The future of education in this country really weigh heavily on your shoulders. But I have that enormous confidence in you, in your integrity and your ability, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Secretary Duncan, currently the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is the official name, we change the name each time we reauthorize, but currently ESEA provides for the same interventions for schools that do not make AYP, adequate yearly progress, regardless of why or how much a school did not meet the AYP. Do you believe that it makes sense to provide for some differentiated interventions to encourage and help schools to target their responses on the reasons they did not meet AYP, and also to recognize that schools that miss AYP by an inch may not need as much extensive intervention as those who miss by a mile?
It's a really thoughtful question, and one of the challenges with the current law is exactly what you say, that it is what I label it as, is a blunt instrument, that it puts every school in the same, too many schools in the same category, and the complexity in those stories amongst those schools is actually very different. Part of what I used to be frustrated with is you had schools that were actually showing pretty significant progress each year, that were really improving, that were labeled as failures. And that's demoralizing, that's very tough on staff and faculty and teachers that are working really hard every day. It's confusing to parents. And where schools are improving each year, rather than slapping them and labeling them as failures, we need to actually encourage that and reward that and help them continue to grow. So I think you have to be much more differentiated in how you approach schools. And when you think about those schools that are labeled as failures, some are actually getting better, some are pretty mediocre, and then I've talked about those schools that are truly at the bottom. where, frankly, I don't think we went far enough historically, where I think we need to be much tougher in our intervention, not just invest more resources in a dysfunctional culture, but fundamentally challenge that status quo. So the idea of greater differentiation and more thoughtfulness and really understanding which schools are improving, which schools are flatlining, and which schools are really a huge problem, and being very, very specific in what our remedy, what our answer is in each of those situations, I think is absolutely the right thing to do for children.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, President Obama has talked about the importance of every American having at least 1 year of post-secondary education. I've introduced legislation, H.R. 1578, the Fast Track to College Act, that would support early college, high school, and other dual enrollment programs to expose low-income students to college. We have that in Flint, Michigan. You can go to Central High School, where I taught, and also enroll at the University of Michigan. You can get up to 60 college credits while you're in high school. When that was inaugurated with the community college several years ago, we felt that would take care of those who were, very talented, who needed that higher challenge. But we found out very often those who were not doing well at all, who just kind of dropped out mentally, really sparkled when they got into a program like that. Would you support a program of early college?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of dual enrollment, and when we talk about investing in what works and scaling up what works, that's an example of a program, not just in Flint, Michigan, but I think generally around the country, that's been extraordinarily effective, and for a couple reasons. First of all, obviously at a time when going to college is so expensive, getting those college credits in your back pocket before you graduate from high school is a huge boost to families and to students. But your second point is actually the more important one to me, that we have so many students today that are first generation, that may not have a parent who graduated from high school, let alone went to college, who might be new to the country, where they're smart, they're committed, they're working hard, but they might think college isn't for them. They don't know that world. Their social isolation is so profound, they might think they might not belong on a college campus. And for those students as a junior and senior year who might be struggling, who might not really envision that in their future, for them to understand, I can really do this. I can do this work. I belong in that world. The psychological impact on that is extraordinarily important. And the more that real exposure can happen for children who don't have a family background of college, going in college experience, I think it can really change their aspirations in very important ways.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions I'd like to submit in writing, if I could, to the Secretary. We have limited time in this format, and I'd look forward to your response to those. I also wanted to touch on a couple of points, and if you'd care to respond to any of them, that would be fine. First, to thank you and the administration for the work you're doing in the direct loan area. This program has been a great success, and it will be a great benefit to higher education and to the taxpayer and to students to expand it, as you've been suggesting, and I'm looking forward to working with you to that. And I understand you're going to be working on a number of reform suggestions in the vocational education area, and in that connection would urge that you look at the experience of my own state of Wisconsin, where we have had a comprehensive vocational education program for many years that involves partnership of business, labor, local governments, and the local school systems. And I think there may be some ideas that can be built on there. I was excited by your opening statement talk in favor of a better assessment and accountability electronic system. In that connection, Congressman Wu and I have introduced a bill, H.R. 665, which really shouldn't be necessary, which would just reverse the Education Department's denial of the ability of school systems around the country, states, to use adaptive testing under No Child Left Behind. My own state uses that at its own expense in nearly a third of the school districts. It's highly useful to teachers and others, and I'd urge you to look at that policy and see if we can't move into the electronic age. They argue it because it's the same program for everyone, but the questions aren't given in the same order. The questions vary. If a student is not able to answer the questions, they ask easier and easier questions till they achieve a certain level of success, and contrary, if they're acing it, they ask harder questions, so you get a really good assessment. And I'm hoping No Child Left Behind means every child gets assessed, and that assessment follows the child, and they make reasonable improvement from wherever they are, rather than an impossible goal of uniform success for every child, which is, we're not uniform human beings. Third, there's a program called Troops to Teachers. It's been very successful. Over 10,000 people have participated. They've been selected as outstanding teachers in their states quite often. That has been paired way back by the Department of Education, so that now only one of the 420 school districts in my state qualifies for Troops to Teachers. Congresswoman Matsui from California, I've introduced legislation to attempt to correct what we feel is an improper ruling by the lawyers at your department to restrict this, was not intended by the drafters of the legislation creating No Troops to Teachers. And this is you need good teachers to get good outcomes, and it's part of the process, and reaching out and getting people with experience. These Troops to Teacher people are disproportionately minority, male, and going into math and science. It's just a wonderful program, I think should be built upon rather than being cut back. Finally, there is a new Inspector General's report on the Federal Student Aid Office in your department, arguing that there are a lot of abuses in that, and I just want to ask if you're familiar with that report, if you plan to take any corrective action. A provision in last year's Higher Education Act required the Secretary to refer settlements over $1 million to the Attorney General. A number of settlements were entered into prior to that, and it's been very costly for the taxpayer. I wonder if you could look into whether any cases have in fact been referred to the Attorney General or are likely to be reviewed, or whether some of the settlements could be reopened before the statute of limitation expires. And so I think I've left enough on your plate, and I'll stop for there. But anyway, welcome aboard. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I'm a huge fan of Troops to Teachers. I think it's a phenomenal pool of talent. As you said, many men from the minority community, great leaders by definition, who are just phenomenal role models. On a broader basis, I'm just a big fan of alternative certification. And I think we have to think about these pools of talent from many walks of life, and historically, people who didn't major in education as an 18-year-old undergrad have been locked out of teaching. And we have as many as 1 million teachers are going to retire in the next 4 to 6 years. Baby boomer generation coming out. It presents some challenges. I think it presents a huge opportunity. And our ability to recruit and retain the best and brightest, whether they're 21-year-old right out of school, or 35, or 55 coming out of the military, we have a chance to transform public education in our country for the next 25 or 30 years. So it's a huge opportunity. Troops to Teachers, and more broadly, alternative certification is something we're going to push very, very hard.
Thank you. Mr. Payne.
Thank you very much, and let me commend the Obama administration and your department for really starting to put the type of funding we need into public education. As a former public school teacher in Newark, New Jersey, and my 3 children are all either teachers or involved in education, I think this is very, very important. Let me quickly ask several questions. First of all, with the growing demand for global economy and strengthening standards in education as a result of No Child Left Behind, it seems that today's students have more to learn, but the same amount of time that they did when they were doing the farming in June. That's why we left school, is the same amount of time we have in our public school system. Massachusetts expanded the school day and at the end of the year by 25 or 30% for selected students, primarily in failing school districts, and it did show positive results. What is your stance on the having a longer school day? Have you given that any consideration?
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing it up. And when I speak to students, this is not the line. This is not my applause line. I usually get booed.
Yeah.
But I fundamentally think our day is way too short. I think our week is way too short. And I think our year is way too short. And our students today are competing against children in India and China. And those students are going to school 25, 30% longer than we are. And our students, I think, are at a competitive disadvantage. I think we're doing them a disservice. So let me explain, because this is a really important one. I think we need a longer school day, absolutely. I think beyond the longer school day, our schools themselves need to be open much longer hours. I would argue 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a wide variety of after-school programming, both for children and their parents and their older brothers and sisters, their family members. I want schools to truly become community centers, community anchors with a whole host of after-school activities. Those schools need to be open 12, 13 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, 11, 12 months out of the year. And I worry tremendously about summer. As everyone here knows, our academic calendar is based upon the agrarian calendar. Okay. And not too many children are working the fields anymore. And I worry particularly about children who come from families that don't have a lot of books in the house. And middle-class children this summer go to summer camps, and they visit colleges, and they do enrichment. And children from more disadvantaged backgrounds really struggle over the summer. And it's well documented. This is one we don't need any more studies. We saw it all the time in Chicago, what we call summer reading loss. That you get children to a certain point by June, and when they come back to you in September, they're further behind than when they left in June. It's absolutely crazy. And so one of the things that we're pushing hard, particularly with all this huge influx of Title I dollars for poor families, is let's get more time, weekends, after school, Saturdays. One thing we did this last year in Chicago, I wish we had been smart enough to come up with it earlier. We brought back on a voluntary basis our freshmen a month early. We had 15,000 freshmen, incoming freshmen, show up a month early. Think about that. Children want to do something positive. They want to do something productive. We've got to open up our schools and think very, very differently. So time is a huge equalizer, particularly for children coming from disadvantaged families and communities. And we have to be much more creative in how we lengthen the day, the week, and the year.
Thank you very much. In your opinion, are there any innovations that charter schools have adopted that you think public schools should consider that's been successful?
Yeah, one big one, time. Many charters are doing some interesting things around curriculum, but if you look at high-performing charter schools, almost every single one, they're working with those kids longer hours, longer days, longer weeks, shorter summers. So when good teaching is happening, time matters, and we simply need more time, again, for those children who may not be getting what we want them to get at home. So there are other things that are happening that's creative, but one of the most important common denominators is they're simply spending more time working at it. It's not rocket science.
Okay, did have a couple of questions, but let me just get one last quick one. And there's a budget item, although I really applaud all the great things that you've done. There is a budget item that eliminated in your budget the funding for a program called Ready to Read. It's a program that's funded. It's funding the PBS, and it's a teacher online program which has had a lot of success. And I wonder if you could take a look at that. And evaluate. It might have been something that, you're looking, since you're increasing, you're looking to cut, but it's been a pretty successful program, and I would appreciate it if you could get back to me on that particular program.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Thank you. Mr. Castle.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let me thank you, Secretary Duncan, for your engagement and involvement in what I consider to be as important as anything we're doing in this country. And let me just start with this question, which is a college question. You and I discussed this a little bit, and I'm all for the things you're trying to do. That is to shift money around, save more money, put it into Pell Grants or whatever it may be. But my concern is the cost of higher education. As you undoubtedly know, higher education has had the highest per capita rise in costs of any measurable index in this country, including even health care. And that concerns me. And I think it's beyond just the salaries of college presidents and a few coaches or whatever. It's the entire methodology of running colleges. Is there anything that we as a Congress or you in the department or the president could be doing to try to keep the pressure on and reducing those costs? Because we just are not going to be able to afford to continue to underwrite it with the Pell Grants, whatever. And even the Harvards of the world are going to have trouble with some of their losses in terms of taking care of kids who could not otherwise afford college.
Well, yes, as I said in my testimony, that through the Perkins proposal, we're really going to try and reward those schools that are doing the right thing. But while I worry about it, I really do believe what I said earlier, that due to families being under so much financial pressure now, and the fact that we have so many universities out there, I think the marketplace is going to play here. And I think families are going to stop going to schools where costs are skyrocketing and running away. They have too many other good options, too many quality, low-cost options. So we're going to continue to put pressure on and create some incentives. But the public is going to see this stuff. We're asking for transparency. We're asking to see how, what these increases are looking like each year. And again, I think our parents and our students are going to be very, very smart consumers. And you're actually seeing, it's interesting, if you're looking recently, you're seeing universities start to go to 3-year programs. You're seeing some universities start to go to sort of no-frills campuses, really back to basics to reduce costs. And there's a growing marketplace. There's a demand there. And so I think this is one I give you my word, we'll put the pressure on and we'll really push transparency. But the more universities do this, this is the wrong time, the wrong market for them to be going that direction. And I think they'll pay a price for it.
Good. And I hope you're right about all those things. We need to keep an eye on it and keep working together on it. In No Child Left Behind, we adopted having standards and assessments. And we had a hearing recently in which a series of people, mostly state involved, talked about common standards and a state-led approach to common standards. You've also used that expression. I want to make sure I understand what we're talking about. Are we talking about common standards in a regional sense? Or are we talking about national standards? And obviously assessments would have to follow all this. So we talk about national standards and assessments. What do we mean by common standards? And just another part to all this, I think our standards are low right now. I think they were set low and they've stayed that way. What can we do to increase standards apart from going to whatever the common standards may be?
And this is a really interesting one. This goes actually back to the framework of NCLB. And it's interesting from a management's perspective, for whether it's running a department or a business or a school system, you always think through what you manage loose and what you manage tight. And what I think NCLB got fundamentally wrong is they were very, very loose on the goals. So you had 50 states, 50 different goalposts all over the map, and you're exactly right. Due to political pressure, the vast majority of those states, those standards got dummied down.
Right.
And what I've been pushing very hard is I think in far too many states, including the state I'm from, in Illinois, those standards have been dummied down so far that we are actually lying to children. And let me explain what I mean. When a child and a parent hears that they are quote-unquote meeting a state standard, the logical conclusion is if I'm meeting a standard, I'm doing okay. But in far too many places, those standards have been dummied down so much that if you're meeting the standard, you are barely qualified to graduate from high school, and you are absolutely inadequately prepared to get into a competitive university, let alone graduate. And so I think as a country, we're doing in many places a real disservice to children. And the one level playing field we have is the NAEP results. And it's interesting, you have some states where in their state, 85, 90% of kids are meeting state standards. On the NAEP, 15% are meeting. So these huge, huge disparities. Who's lying? Who's telling the truth? And so what I think we need is common college-ready, career-ready, I would argue internationally benchmarked standards. Again, I want our children to compete on a level playing field with children in India and China. I don't think this should come from the federal government. There shouldn't be federal standards. There shouldn't be Department of Education standards. But what you see happening is a really interesting movement. You have a set of state school chiefs that are working very, very hard on this. You have a set of governors that are coming together to work on this. The business community has been crying out for this for a long time. The non-for-profit sector, Achieve, College Board, Gates are all on board. And very interestingly, in the past 2 months, you've seen the presidents of both national unions, the NEA and the EAFT, come on board and say we need to do something different here. So this is an idea that I think historically people call it a third rail, or people are scared to talk about it. To me, it's really common sense, and we're going to really try and help incent this and put some money on the table to encourage it. But everyone, business, nonprofits, political leaders, state school chiefs, the unions, us, we're all saying that thinking about this in a very different way is the right way to go. So I think as a country, as we think about NCLB reauthorization, I think we should be tight on the goals, very clear on the goals, but give people flexibility in terms of how to achieve that goals. And really, I think the great ideas for education, the innovation will always come from the local level. It will never come from Washington. And the more we hold folks accountable for results, but allow them to be creative and to innovate and to be entrepreneurial to hit that higher bar. So tight on the bar, looser on how you get there, less prescriptive on how you get there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You'd mentioned in your prepared remarks, the problem of dropout. We obviously have dropout factories. We also have a situation that some dropout factories are actually getting credit for adequate yearly progress. Would you support making the dropout rate an essential element in maintaining adequate yearly progress?
Well, I think it's even broader than that. Again, as we think about NCLB reauthorization, I'm out now on this listening and learning tour around the country. I'm learning so much, talking to students and to teachers and to parents and to principals. But I think one thing we can all agree on, if you have the best third grade test scores in the world, but 50% of your students are dropping out, you're really not helping kids. You're not changing lives. And so at the end of the day, really thinking about graduation rates as a benchmark that we have to hold ourselves accountable for collectively at the district level, at the state level, and the national level, that is hugely important to me.
One part of the response to lack of adequate yearly progress are certain sanctions or responses, some of which have nothing to do with the subgroup that caused the failure. If one subgroup fails, then the response is a response that covers everybody.
Yeah.
Would you support a change in this to make sure that the response to a failure in adequate yearly progress would address the problem?
Yeah. Let me answer this a little bit more broadly. I think this is really important that as we think about NCLB reauthorization, we have a huge opportunity here. And this is something we're not going to do every year. You know, we're going to do this once every 5, 6 years, whatever the right rhythm is. We need to get this right. And so let me be really clear. I think we have a chance to think blue skies. I want to continue to travel the country and really get the pulse of the country. But where things are working, we absolutely need to continue them and support them. And when things aren't working, let's just not tweak around the edges. Let's fix it. And so without getting into all the specifics of what those are, we have a real chance here to build upon the successes and build upon what made a lot of sense and to think fundamentally different where things didn't make sense. And so I just want to ask all of you to work with me to think about how we take this to the next level and really do a much, much better job of creating the right set of incentives and consequences and rewards to help schools and school districts do the right thing by children.
Thank you. And can you tell us, in a teacher's career, when the teacher is at his or her best?
I wish I had an exact number on that.
Would it be the first year or the second year, or
I think
as they become more experienced, they become better?
Yeah, I'd say teachers like being a congressman, and it takes some years to learn the ropes and
well, if that's
gain
the case,
experience.
if that's the case, then some of the programs to get teachers into teaching only keep them in for 2 or 3 years, which seems to me before they've gotten to what could be their best. Should there be incentives in some of these programs that encourage teachers to get in, that they be incentives for them to stay in much longer so that we can get the full benefit of those incentives?
Let me answer that in 2 parts. I think we have to do everything we can to keep our good teachers teaching. And we actually lose far too many of our good teachers because we don't adequately support them, we don't give them the classroom management skills, we don't give them good mentoring induction, and we lose far too many of our good teachers. The flip side of it is I think we have teachers who aren't good who stay too long. And so it's really thinking about how we find out, how do we identify the best and the brightest, do a much better job of supporting them. And with teachers where it's just not the right profession, not keeping them in there for the next 25 or 30 years, I think is equally as important. And I think we have to prove on both sides, really making sure we keep the best and brightest and how we have honest conversations with those that need to find something else to do with their lives.
Thank you. And finally, I've introduced legislation that on youth violence prevention that takes a holistic approach, requiring the community to come together. The Youth Promise Act.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear.
The Youth Promise Act.
Okay.
Which requires the community to come together in a holistic strategy to deal with young people. Can you say a bit about what we need to do and how we need to address youth violence?
It's a huge issue.
Well, rather than let you do it off the top of your
Okay.
head, if you could respond in writing then.
I will. I just say quickly that we have to dramatically reduce it, not just in schools, but in communities. And what we want to do, I'm a big fan of what's gone on in the Harlem Children's Zone, what Jeffrey Canada's done there, and we have real money to try and create other Harlem Children's Zones to replicate that. I think creating the environment, not just in the school, but in the surrounding community where life is valued and where education is valued, we want to play in that in a big way.
Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. We just jump around to keep the witnesses on their toes as to where we might be sitting. As you know, Mr. Secretary, for now over 30 years, the federal government has demanded through IDEA that all schools fund special education, provide special education, and the federal government was supposed to provide 40% of that funding. It has never come close. We had a few years from 1995 to about 2005 where we steadily brought that percentage up. It never got to 20%. And frankly, Mr. Secretary, I was surprised when this budget came out that you haven't done anything about increasing that funding for special ed. Why didn't you fully fund IDEA in this budget?
Well, I think you probably know in the Recovery Act, we've put north of $10 billion.
Which still leaves us far short, by the way. If that gets you at the most, if you spent all $11.5 billion in 1 year, you would still be well short of the 40%, and does nothing going forward. So the question is still the same. You put in at least 5 new K-12 programs in the President's budget. $500 million for a new Title I Early Childhood Grant Program, $300 million for a new Early Learning Challenge Fund, $100 million for a new What Works and Innovation Fund. The point is we're putting new programs in that are not fully funded, and yet we haven't come close to meeting this obligation. And I just wonder why it wasn't put in the budget.
Well, again, I think there's an unprecedented investment in this, a dramatic increase, the likes of which we have never seen before that I'm aware of. It's a very, very significant step in the right direction. And we obviously have to balance lots of different needs. And so we took a very significant step, I think, in the right direction there. But we have to look across the board as well.
So you just didn't have the money, but we have money for new programs that will be chronically underfunded. This House just passed legislation putting you in the school construction business, which, and I'm afraid, once again, we've got a new very, very expensive program, a federal government program, which will be chronically underfunded and will be competing again for this special education money, for IDEA funding. If we would fund IDEA to the extent that we're supposed to the extent that we're obligated to, we would help every school district in America. These other programs are going to help some, not help some, advantage some, disadvantage others. I would just really like to see the administration. It's one of the great disappointments I had with the Bush administration. We brought in No Child Left Behind. There was a lot of discussion, some excitement, some disappointment. And we've been talking about that here. But they didn't fund it either. And it just seems to me it's a shortfall that we ought to be able to agree across party lines and from across branches of government that it's an obligation that we ought to meet. And I appreciate that more money was put in when we were throwing hundreds of billions of dollars that we were borrowing out to stimulate the economy. Some money went in there, but that's a long way from actually budgeting for IDEA and making a commitment to meet that 40% funding and helping every school district in America. So I understand the answer. You are where you are, but I would just ask you, as the head of the Department of Education and working with the administration, let's try to move that forward and help every school in America.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Appreciate
I yield back,
concern.
Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Woolsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I just have to think out loud that it's quite strange that Mr. Klein didn't vote for the stimulus package, which did double ID.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I'm sorry, I really shouldn't have even said that.
Exactly.
Much
Thank
of
you.
my time. Mr. Secretary, I was glad to see the President's budget request included $10 million for Promise neighborhoods. This is an issue I've always been interested in about coordinating school services at or near the school site so that kids can come to school ready to learn. I just don't think we provide a complete product to the teachers when these children are hungry or scared or sick. So could you provide us with any more information about how the President envisions these grants to work?
Yeah, and this is obviously, I think, a huge step in the right direction, but this is money simply to plan. And in subsequent budget years, we want to put real resources on the table to basically try and replicate what's worked around the Harlem Children's Zone, and where we can make improvements, we want to do that too. But as everyone here understands, schools are not islands. They exist in larger communities. And the more we can create environments, to Mr. Scott's question, that are safe for children, the more create environments where everyone from babies to adults are involved in their own education and really supporting families, the more we're taking a comprehensive approach for communities that have been disadvantaged and underserved for far too long, we create the climate and the culture and environment in which students can thrive and be successful. So there's been some very rigorous analysis of the results coming out of the Harlem Children's Zone. We are very, very encouraged by that. There's tremendous interest in this around the country, and we're going to put significant resources on the table. The philanthropic community is also very interested in this, so I think we can leverage some private sector dollars here as well. And so our goal is to issue a request for proposals, an RFP, and to start working with a set of locations. These aren't school districts, a set of neighborhoods basically that are really willing to think differently, think about the intersection of education and nonprofits and the business community and religious institutions to come together to create an environment in which every single child can thrive. So it's a very, very exciting opportunity.
Well, I look forward to working with you on that. I think it's very important. I'm going to change the subject immediately to nutrition standards for the foods that are sold outside of school meal programs. They haven't been updated since my children were in school in the 70s. And I've introduced legislation, H.R. 1324, the Child Nutrition Promotion and School Lunch Protection Bill, to update these standards. And my question to you is, do you support updating the nutrition standards for foods in vending machines and a la carte lines and other foods sold outside of the school meal programs, and are you going to help us with this?
There's a lot of work we need to do, and I want to work very closely with Secretary Vilsack, who's done, I think he's going to do a phenomenal job there at the Department of Ag that does the lunches. But we need to think about what we're doing, not just around the food we offer, what we're doing around nutrition and obesity, what we're doing to promote healthy lifestyles and exercise. So there's a whole package of activities that I think we need to be much more creative on. And so we need to think about those standards. We need to think about our lunches. We need to think about what's in the vending machines, what's available to kids. And when you see children going to school in the morning with a pop and a pack of chips, I really worry about what kind of day they're going to have. And we see that all too often.
And what their teachers are going to have to put up with. Well, speaking of creativity, music is part of education as far as I'm concerned, and I fear that with No Child Left Behind, we've squeezed too many of our music and arts programs. And so how does the department plan to ensure that we have more art and music and creativity?
These are great questions. Again, whether it's art or music or dance or drama, and I would go, chess, debate, sports, academic decathlon. We need to do so much more. If we're serious about reducing dropout rates and keeping students engaged, we have to do so much more to give students a menu of options and let them figure out what their passion is. And what always bothers me is these kinds of opportunities, historically, these have been normal opportunities for children who go to private schools, and for children who go to public schools, these are somehow seen as extracurricular, something that can afford to be cut. And I think all of these things, there's a huge correlation, as you know, between music aptitude and math. But even beyond that, just giving students a reason to be excited about coming to school. And it might be the band, it might be the orchestra, it might be to perform in a play, it might be to be on the chess team or the debate team. And we talk about lengthening the day and lengthening the year and creating these opportunities both during the school day and after school. I don't think we can do enough of this. And as I talked to students in Detroit, so many of them talked about it was the band, it was the football team. Those are the reasons why they kept going to school and didn't drop out. And so I think we have to think very, very differently, get away from narrowing the curriculum and investing in those things to give students a chance to be excited about coming to school, but to find their passion and build their sense of self-esteem.
Ms. Biggert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for all that you accomplished as the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools. It was a pleasure to work with you on a couple of issues that you had with the then Secretary of Education, and you were a winner there and did a great job representing the Chicago Public Schools. So
thanks for all your support.
Thank you, and I think we expect great things from you as Secretary of Education, and with your vision and experience, I know that you'll succeed. So we're really happy to have you there. Just a couple of questions. Turning to back to the student loans that Mr. McKeon mentioned, with approximately 25% of the student loans originate now through the direct loan program compared to 75% from the FEL program. And how are you going to switch, if we have to handle the increased volume required by the President's proposal? And since all of those FEL programs seem to have worked, I know we've had a discussion in the last several Congresses about the issue between the two programs, but why do we want to just continue with one program without much debate here?
Yeah. I think the simple goal is to create the best deal we can for students, for their parents, and for taxpayers. And you have a situation where, as you know, that the FEL program was on life support. We as a government were heavily subsidizing the vast majority of those loans anyway. And if we have a chance to move out of the business of subsidizing banks and put, year after year, literally billions of dollars of additional resources out to students at a time when going to college has never been more expensive, it's never been tougher for families, and there's never been less resources at home. A chance to do all this without adding another taxpayer dollar to the mix, I think is the right thing to do. And so what we want to do is really make sure on the private side that the private sector services these loans. We don't want to get in that business. That shouldn't be the business we're in. We can create real opportunities there and create competition and have providers that are doing a great job of servicing, give them more business going forward. So I think there's a real chance for the private sector to continue to play. But at the end of the day, the goal is simply to try and get the best deal we can for students, for parents, for taxpayers.
I guess I don't see the difference with the private loans versus the direct loan as being costing less, and with less competition, won't the cost go up?
Well, no, actually the difference is to keep the private sector engaged, we have heavily subsidized that to the tune of billions of dollars a year. And we simply want to transfer those subsidies, those dollars from banks to students. And so it is a different priority, but we think it's the right priority.
Okay. Then just going back to the special ed for a moment, and not the money, but special ed in the No Child Left Behind has always been a special category. And so many teachers that I've talked to when they were going to do the testing said that they were just in tears when they had to include the special ed children in their grade level. And I think that the No Child Left Behind did a great job of really increasing the quality of education for the special ed kids. But at the same time, when those tests came along, it really was demoralizing and really a disaster for that testing. Is that going to change? Are you looking ahead to that?
It's a really thoughtful question, and I think this is one, again, as we think about NCLB reauthorization, that we need to be very, very thoughtful on both sides of the equation. Let me give you both. That I've heard lots of horror stories of students asked to take a test where they had, couldn't begin to read the questions, and it being an absolutely traumatizing experience. So does that make sense for that child? It doesn't. The flip side of that is you want to maintain a high bar, and you have now in the current legislation these exemptions of a certain percent of students arbitrarily. That doesn't make sense to either. So I think we have to sort of find that balance act between between walking away from accountability, which we absolutely don't want to do, and just exempting students, but also having an assessment that's appropriate for the student's cognitive ability. And so we have to sort of strike that balance, and we have some work to do to get there.
Would you consider, using their LAP to decide what test level they would take?
If you're going to look at these issues, you would have to look at the IEP. It would have to be part of the conversation.
Okay.
So I think that this one and the other one that's complicated similarly is how you assess the knowledge of English language learners, ELL students. I think on both of these we need to have some real conversation and debate and figure out who's doing this best in the country and try and scale that up.
Unfortunately, my time has expired.
Mr. Hinojosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Duncan, thank you for coming to visit with us, and I want to say that your remarks in the opening part of this meeting is excellent, because you address so many problems that are of concern to us in Texas. I had the pleasure of going to China with CODEL led by Buck McKeon, and we wanted to know why their high schools were outperforming ours by so much. And we learned some of the things that you used in your remarks, and that was parental involvement plus early reading plus writing equals success in school was the way that they answered the questions when we met with stakeholders out there. Number two, we saw that on the weekends they were doing exactly what you said today, and that was utilizing their schools for extracurricular activities and thus really utilizing their schools. Longer days, longer weeks, all of that, we saw it ourselves as members of Congress. So we want to support your thinking. But I'm going to focus on something that is also of great interest to me, because it's shocking to hear that in Detroit we've had as much as 75% dropout rate. In minority populations like districts like mine, 80% Hispanic, we have 50% dropout. And it's tough as heck to get our kids to go to college. The National Center for Education Statistics report that since 1984, minority undergraduate student enrollment surged by 146%, compared to growth of only 15% for the white population students. Minority-serving institutions represent less than 1/3 of all degree-granting Title IV institutions, but enroll more than half of all the minority students. How does the administration plan to build on the efforts that Congress has already made in the passage of the, I think we call it the College Cost Reduction and Access Act, plus the passage of Higher Education Opportunity Act?
I think one of the most important things we can do as a country is get many more students going to college, but particularly students from the minority community. I think this huge expansion in resources to make college more affordable, Pell Grants, Perkins loans, tuition tax credits, the students going to those minority-serving institutions often come from financially difficult situations, and they're going to be huge beneficiaries of these new resources. So I think if we can continue to put this money on the table year after year after year, and families can know that they have access to these resources, that's going to be very, very important. And let me just add one quick thing on that. To me, again, it's not just the money, it's students at a young age knowing that money is going to be there for them, this idea of making it mandatory. Because I worry a lot about really smart 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th graders whose father might have lost a job, whose mother may have taken a 50% pay cut, who start to think at an early age, because of my family's financial situation, college isn't for me. And if we as a country can say this money's mandated, this money's going to be there, it doesn't matter what's going on at home, I think, again, the psychological message at an early age that sense of students is that there's a reason to hope, there's a reason to work hard.
I agree with you, and I want to say that back in 1998, we started the Gear Up program, which was intended to address that children could see that if they stayed in school, there was light at the end of the tunnel. So we need to consider increasing the Gear Up program funding if we are going to answer that concern of yours. But let me go on to visits by chancellors and presidents in my office saying that accessibility and affordability was their to higher education was their highest priority. And you answered Congressman Castle's question completely on, as far as I'm concerned, on skyrocketing cost of college education. But let's go then to the issue that you discussed earlier about supporting. I know I want to support your college student loan program because, according to numbers that I saw, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that the savings of the direct government student loan program can yield $93 billion over the next 10 years. And my question to you is, what can we do in Congress to help that this program is going to be successful the next decade?
Yeah, well, this is obviously, this is in our FY010 budget, and your support of that measure would be extraordinarily important. We can help students, as you said, for decades without asking for another dollar from taxpayers.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, I know we're hoping to hold you here at 11:30. If you could stay with us another 15 minutes, obviously there's no shortage of members who have questions, but we expect votes starting probably in about 10 minutes. on this side of the aisle, I have Mr. Thompson, Mr. Rowe, it's Guthrie, and over here is McCarthy, Tierney, Davis, Grijalva, depending on who shows or doesn't. Oh, Mr. Thompson left. So, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've spent 24 years in the public school system. I told the committee last week I overdosed on it. But I think education is not a cost, but an investment. And I think we look at it as a cost. And as you said earlier, money, very eloquently, money is not always the answer. And I guess one of the first questions I want to ask is, we've been spending more and more and more and more money and getting worse and worse and worse results. Why is that?
I don't know if I totally agree with that. I think what we see is very uneven results. I think you see some places of extraordinary excellence, and school districts, individual schools, charter groups getting phenomenal results with very difficult populations, and you see other places, like Detroit, which I think is like ground zero educationally. So what I see is not uniformity. I see very disparate outcomes. And while that presents some challenges, to me, it's actually why I'm so hopeful, that I would argue we have more good ideas about what works today than we have at any previous time. And over the past 5, 10, 15 years, we've seen more entrepreneurial educators. We've seen great visionaries step up. And so in every community, rural, inner city, urban, we have examples of schools and children beating the odds every single day. What I want to do is to invest wisely and to really take to scale those best practices and invest in what works. And so I think we have a real opportunity here to make those pockets of excellence, systems of excellence, and sort of get away from this idea of islands and make these high-quality opportunities the norm rather than the exception.
I agree with that. I live in eastern Tennessee and trained in West Tennessee at Memphis, and my wife taught for 3 years in the school system there. One of the questions we get all the time, and I'll make just one comment and then ask you the question. I'm right with you on this alternative certification, because as a physician, I can't be qualified to teach 8th grade health. Right. That's crazy. And you can't be teach health in high school. I couldn't do it if I retired and wanted to do that. So I'm with you 100% there. We need to have ways to get folks who've retired as chemists and mathematicians and so forth back in the schoolroom. I agree with that. One of the things we hear, and I know you've heard it until you're deaf, is that the teachers, and I have many, many of them who've been patients of mine, complain that, look, Dr. Rowe, I'm just teaching to the test. That's what I'm doing. How do you answer those teachers in the classroom? When we talk about and I agree with you, the standards are all over the place, and if we have a national standard, how do we answer that question?
I think the real question is not teaching to test, but the question is it a good assessment? I think if it's a good assessment, then you want people teaching to it. And if it's a bad assessment, you don't. And so again, really thinking about this high bar and thinking about making it quality and thinking about, does it evaluate critical thinking skills? Are we teaching our children to think and to write and to express their ideas critically? And if we can collectively come up with assessments that are strong, that are good assessments, I think that's a good thing. I can't speak for you, but you have to pass some exams to become a doctor. If those are good exams, teaching to those is actually a good thing. It gives you the knowledge and skills you need. So really thinking about the quality of assessments, I think, is very, very important going forward.
I think I had to chuckle a little bit when you said about how we want to get the government out of the business of banking. Anyway, I won't go there. In China, I read a statistic the other day, or saw a statistic the other day, where they have more honor students than we have students in this country. That's a scary number when you compete on a world market.
Yeah, I think so much of our challenge, honestly, money is a piece of the answer, but let me be clear. The money is only good if we leverage reform. If we invest in the status quo, we are not going to get where we need to go in the country. We have to drive a very strong reform agenda. And secondly, we have to raise our expectations as adults. And a huge part of the problem is we have too many adults who don't really believe that children can be successful. And thinking about how we get more students taking AP classes, how we get more minority students taking AP classes. We as adults have to really believe in our hearts that every single child, regardless of family background, regardless of socioeconomic status, can be successful. And not to just belabor this, but I met with these phenomenal students in Detroit, seniors, worked hard, overcome horrendous odds, super smart, going to college. I come to understand they don't have an AP class in their high school. How is that possible? How is that possible today?
I guess one other thing right quick, and then you may have to answer this because I know the other folks want to ask questions, but on schools that are failing, 2,000 schools equal half of our dropouts. Why don't we do something? I'm a person that's gone to nothing but public schools, but a charter school or a scholarship or anything to get them out of there, because we're letting a generation fail.
Well, I think we have to turn those schools around. And again, we did this in Chicago. There are other folks that are getting this business. And to us to continue to invest in a situation that's broken, I think we have to think very, very differently. Let me be clear. The high school dropout rate is not just a high school issue. We need to look at those high schools. We have to look at their feeder middle schools, and we have to look at those feeder elementary schools. And if we can look at all those schools at the same time, we can change the opportunity structure for that entire neighborhood. But this takes courage. This takes a willingness to challenge the status quo. Tinkering around the edges here is not going to get us where we need to go.
Ms. McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly welcome you, Secretary Duncan. We had a few minutes to talk earlier about school safety, and that's going to be something that I have been working on for a number of years. I agree that there's a lot more work that needs to be done, but you are probably one of the few, if not only, Secretary of Education that is coming from a school district or from a school district that's had, unfortunately, an awful lot of violence in those schools. I have some of those schools in my district, and I guess anyone that's in a urban, suburban area sees that. So one of the things that I wanted to ask about was your budget proposes to zero out the state grants for safe and drug-free schools and transfer a portion of that funding to the national programs. I guess what I'm looking at, why do you see the money going from the safe and drug-free into the national programs? But I guess what confuses me, if you believe the national programs are better, then why only take, I guess you took $110 million out of the $295 million. So it's kind of leaving both programs starving, I guess. One other thing, too, is that I also believe many of our students are doing excellent. Unfortunately, it's middle school and high school that we start to see the dropouts starting. We have worked in my district on Project Grad. The TRIO program works terrific. What we have seen with the kids, when they got involved in it, they were able to bring other youngsters that probably never would. We see their marks going up and going to college. So with that, I appreciate your answers.
Yeah, I'll take the second one first. Project Grad, TRIO, Gear Up, all those programs, dual enrollment, we talked about all these programs that are giving students exposure and access to higher education, not just as juniors and seniors, but in 5th and 6th and 7th grade, I think are hugely important. So we want to continue to do more there. And again, this idea of social isolation and breaking down those barriers is so important to me, and really helping students aspire to be successful and understand they can fit in that environment is critically important. On the safe and drug-free, it was a simple strategic decision. We found with some significant research from IES showing that the money going out to state basically got diluted. There's no real impact. And I want to get that money to districts. I want to get that money to where the action is. And so at the state level, we didn't see much positive going on. If we can use that money to get it out to schools and to districts and really make an impact there, we thought that was the better strategic decision.
Now, are you going to increase the amount of money in it so that when you're looking at the school that needs to have, I have several underserved schools in my district that a lot of these programs are there. It's working. I wish it just could go through high school and not just at certain grades, though.
Yeah. No, I understand the concern. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. And I worked in these issues in the state legislature. And when we finally started to come up with policies I thought that were better was when we spent a lot of time studying failures and why schools failed, and call superintendents up and say, why are you failing? And we finally decided, and I heard Jack Kemp say it actually, and changed my attitude about it. We need to look at schools that demographically should be, or you would predict to fail, that were successful, and study success and how you replicated that. And that changed the whole way we thought about. So we need to replicate success and not just look at the failing schools. One question, I just took a picture on the steps of the Capitol yesterday, and they had all these students sitting around high school, and the mom said, how are we going to pay for college? That's the number one issue in people's minds today, I think. And I think one of the biggest issues in the country, because people have to say pathway to the middle class, and it's through college, and they're seeing that's going down. So I'm glad that's a priority. And there's a question on the failed programs as we were looking at this. My understanding is the $93 billion is money that the banks would be making on these programs, not necessarily a subsidy paid to the banks. It's $93 billion, and by the government doing a direct loan program, the $93 billion will be coming to the government instead of the banks. And the government can borrow at a lower interest rate. And therefore, are we going to reflect that back in what the students pay? Or, for instance, if the students have a fixed pay to the private bank and they pay the same rate to the government, and the government's able to loan money at a lower rate, then the government's actually taking some money from these students who are struggling to go to college and funding other programs with that. They're subsidizing other programs. Is that accurate?
I need to get clear on the technical side of that, and Bob Scheinman is actually testifying here today, and he can walk that through. But I guess our simple goal is to figure out what's right for taxpayers, for students, and for their families, and the goal is not subsidizing the banks, but putting more money on an ongoing basis, on an annual basis, every single year to increase access and affordability. We think is absolutely the right thing to do. But we're not looking to make a margin on this, to be clear.
Does the gentleman's time expired? Oh, he had it. Okay. We will be having a hearing on the loan program tomorrow in the committee. Mr. Chairman will be among one of the witnesses. Mr. Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. I have to take 1 minute of time, unfortunately, just because I don't think it should continually go unaddressed. Our friend from Minnesota, rather, was talking about IDEA funds, and it continues to amaze me how people can continue to say that this is a legislative mandate. Those that know the history of that law know that it is, in fact, a judicial mandate, where the courts indicate that every child deserves an education, and the 40% was an authorization number, not a commitment or promise or a spending appropriation number. And when Mr. Kind and I had the motion to fully fund IDEA for several years in a row, we were in a minority. Not a single Republican voted for it. So we all do it. I happen to be somebody who believes we should fund as much of it as we can. It gives money down to the local communities for flexibility, but just to get the history straight on that. I want to congratulate you and the President on focusing on the cost of higher education. And I'd like to get a commitment from you. In that latest bill, the Higher Education Act that we passed, were policies in there to reward colleges that kept their increases on tuition and fees down to the cost of living, and give them incentives by giving them more campus-based aid, and a provision that states would maintain their effort, that they couldn't simply take the federal money and then take a walk and take their money out of the picture. Are you committed to enforcing both of those provisions as much as possible and to driving the cost at least to a more reasonable rate?
Absolutely.
Okay, I appreciate that. On the issue of reading, we had a lot of people in our, that had troubles with reading first, and some people that like reading first. Can you tell me a little bit about what your philosophy is? What will replace the reading emphasis in this administration? Are you setting standards and expecting Congress to fill it in from there, or do you have a particular proposal for that?
Now, what we want is a balanced and comprehensive approach, and we want to fund this at every level. The early childhood piece, we want to do stuff at the middle school, and we want to look at this at high school as well. And I worry about teenage literacy a lot as well. So we have to look across the board, and this proposal, over $370 million, we think addresses the real need out there, and we want to be very, very thoughtful about how we do this.
Okay. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of teacher performance and so-called merit pay in the President's and your plans?
I'll just simply say that there's unprecedented resources on the table to reward excellence. And I think we can't do enough to highlight those principals, those teachers, those schools that are beating the odds every single day. And I think in so many other professions, excellence is routinely rewarded, and somehow in education we've been a little bit scared of that. So through the Teacher Incentive Fund that the Chairman spoke about, that we have over $500 million to put on the table for districts that want to help reward excellence and support those schools that are making a great difference.
So your philosophy is to incent others to come up with ideas locally as to how they would do that, as opposed to imposing a particular model?
Absolutely. There are lots of good models out there. And so, yeah, I think our goal, again, is to really invest in what works. But I always think, you know, when I was in Chicago, I didn't think all the good ideas came from Washington. Now that I'm in Washington, I know all the ideas don't come from Washington. You know, the best ideas are always going to come from the local level. But we want to really reward those folks that are pushing the envelope. Let me just say quickly on this, because it gets a little complicated. What I will say is where you have programs that pit teachers against each other, I think those fail. And if we have 4 or 5 teachers in a school, and if only one teacher can make more money, then that pushes me to close my doors, and it does not incent the right behavior. And so I'm really big on collaborative awards, And we created a program in Chicago that came from our teachers, where every adult in the building, not just the teachers, benefited, but the principals, the security guards, the custodians, the lunchroom attendants. As you guys, as we visit high-performing schools around the country, uniformly, it is every adult in that building that's part of that culture. And so the more we really create this idea of teamwork and camaraderie, and the lunchroom attendants are making sure they're serving good food, making sure the students are eating, and the custodians are making sure the building is immaculate, and the security guards are making sure students are safe and they're taking their backpacks home in the evening. The more we create that sense of teamwork and camaraderie, the better we're going to see schools do.
Just close with one administrative question. I'm concerned that a number of states are not using the Recovery and Reinvestment Act for education in the manner which they should. You made a statement in your opening remark about that. It seems to me that there's some games being played, and in fact that some are just making themselves and the state budget healthy at the expense of not keeping teachers on the payroll or other education personnel and not filling in those gaps. Do you have enough personnel on your staff to actually do the kinds of reviews that are necessary to enforce those provisions?
We're going to look at this very, very closely. So, yeah, I do not need a new Army to do this. We're watching this. We're monitoring this very closely. And we did two things. And I'm a big believer in carrots and sticks. We put out very significant money through the stimulus package. We withheld billions of dollars. And if folks are acting in bad faith, if folks are gaming, we have a real opportunity not to send out that second set of money. Second, we have these unprecedented discretionary resources, race to the top, school improvement money, teaching. We have all these other resources that states would love to have. If states are playing games now, they're basically going to disqualify themselves. And so this is going to be really interesting to see how creative, how innovative states are going forward. And we have both carrots and sticks to play, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, thank you. We look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, great to be with you. We share your last name and my first name, so it's at least one thing we have in common here, Duncan. I've got a specific question. I'm a veteran, a California resident. I went to San Diego State University, and it was probably about $1,200–1,300 a semester when I went to school. You could work literally for the summer and pay for your fall semester. But right now, with our post 9/11 GI Bill funding for California veterans, they don't get their GI Bill towards any actual tuition for private education. They only get for local fees, because state schools in California, public institutions for higher education, charge only fees. They don't charge tuition. Stanford, for instance, if you were smarter than I am, then you went to Stanford, GI Bill wouldn't help you at all, because that's private education. So I'm wondering on that particular issue if you've talked to the VA at all, and if you have any kind of fix, because there have been exceptions for this in the old Pell Grants. Just checking to see if there's anything now, if we could fix it permanently so that GI Bill covers both private and public institutions in California.
Yeah, I will absolutely look at that for you. Just a question, is that a California-specific issue, or is that a national issue?
California-specific.
Okay, so I need to better understand that one. I will look at that for you.
Okay, and second, tying into this, veterans right now have a higher unemployment rate than on average. Guys getting out of the military, they're 22, 23 years old. They might have been infantry or artillery. They might not have learned a skill. I see them as being disadvantaged because we're not going after them. These are highly motivated, highly disciplined, usually more mature for their age, men and women that have served, that have sacrificed, that have been under extreme pressure. What are we going to do for them to try to get them into schools and bring them into the workforce as educated adults that have 4-year or 8-year degrees?
Yeah, I would love them all to come teach. And so I want to work very, very hard with that population coming back from Iraq, coming back from Afghanistan. Obviously, they have lots of other interests, but those folks that want to come into the classroom, I think they would be phenomenal teachers. I think they're going to be great leaders. You said they're mature. They're not going to be scared. Nothing we can throw at them is going to be tougher than what they've seen before. These are great role models, real discipline, real sense of mission. And so I want to do everything we can to create a basis. We've talked about, troops of teachers and alternative certification. That, to me, is a huge pool of talent that I want to try and open our doors and get them to become teachers if that's in their heart.
The problem is, though, just getting them into school, because there's no net to catch them after they get out after 4 years and they're suddenly released back into the civilized world again.
Yeah.
They don't really know what to do. They go home sometimes. They're looking for the help wanted ads. They don't realize that their GI Bill is going to pay for them to go to school, and we kind of let them out of that net, and we should be catching them and taking advantage
So we should think together of how we do a better job of proactively reaching out. I think the community colleges are a huge opportunity, and due to some of these increases in subsidies, that's almost free for many folks today. I think the average cost of community college is $2,500, $3,000. The tuition tax credit, you're basically going for no money. And to get on that track, again, whether it's education or something else, I think the community colleges are a huge, huge opportunity for vets coming back home. And we should think about how, like you said, we don't just let them wander. We reach out to them and let them know the opportunities that are out there for them.
The gentleman yield.
Absolutely.
Mr. Secretary, this is a VA program. We just hope that they would reach out to you to help administer. I think because of your experience in getting dollars out to the states, the way they send the money out, the California veterans are penalized because California is the only state that does not charge tuition for in-state residents. So I think we put a bill in yesterday, and we think that we can solve this, but we hope that they'll include you in the...
All right. I would love to help. That to me is like a no-brainer, and that doesn't make any sense, and we should fix it. So whatever I can do.
About $6,500 per California veteran would be available through our fix, and this would be a good thing to do.
So let me know what I can do to be supportive.
Mr. Holt's going to have the last question. The Secretary's been very generous with his time. We've held him over, and we're going to have votes in a matter of minutes. Mr. Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming. I must say many Americans have high hopes riding on you, and we wish you every success. Speaking before the National Science Teachers Association, you said that science is all about questioning assumptions, testing theories, analyzing facts. They're basic skills that prepare kids not just for the lab but for life. We're doing kids a disservice if we don't teach them how to ask the tough, challenging questions. I couldn't agree more. Under the AARA, you have the approximately $5 billion Race to the Top funds.
Thank you.
I'd like to know if you plan to use any of those in connection with science education. Secondly, following along this, the 2010 budget actually trims the funding for the math-science partnerships slightly. It is way below what it was when it was the Eisenhower funds a decade back. I think it's an essential program. I'd like to hear what you're going to be doing to increase that program, or if you have some other way that teachers are going to get the professional development that they need and deserve in science education. Third point I'd like to ask you to touch on is foreign languages. Foreign language instruction isn't easy. It should start early. It should be an integral part of even the elementary curriculum all the way through. What foreign language reforms do you propose? And along that line, are you going to create an assistant secretary for international and foreign language study? There is now a deputy assistant secretary. Yeah. It might be more than you can cover now. If you can't cover all of that, I'd appreciate your getting back to us on those points.
We can get back to you. I'll try and do as best I can to answer quickly. I think, and again, this is controversial, we have shortages of math and science teachers. We have shortages of foreign language teachers. I think we need to pay those teachers more. We've been talking about math and science shortages for, I don't know, 25 years, 30 years. I'd like to stop talking about it. It is hard for